The droning of German bombers rings across the city of Paris. People take cover as bombs fall from the sky, causing destruction and death. Something needs to be done to defeat the Germans, so the French come up with an ingenious plan to divert attention from the City of Lights. Build a fake Paris. It might sound far-fetched that the French would consider building an entire fake city to fool the Germans, but that was exactly what they did. And this wasn't just a bunch of unconvincing buildings that looked a little like the French capital. The faux city was meticulously planned out with replicas of some of the most famous buildings in Paris, train yards, and lights that made the decoy come alive at night. But how was such a convincing replica even possible, and did it work? Let's find out. During the First World War, a new form of warfare was developed: air raids. Major bombing runs on Paris were conducted by the Germans, making it one of the first capital cities to ever be bombed from the sky. In 1918, one of the most devastating bombing runs of the war was conducted. Many buildings and monuments were damaged during the raid, but most of the city remained intact. The question on every Parisian's mind was, how much longer until the Germans try again and cause even more damage and casualties? The bombing run killed at least 26 people and wounded around 200 others. It wrecked buildings, streets, and most importantly to the war effort, factories. France had been fighting in the Great War for over 4 years, and they weren't about to let Germany get the upper hand. It was decided the best course of action was to not try and stop the German aircraft, but to have them waste their resources on fake targets. This would save lives, ammunition, and immense amounts of vital resources for the French, while hopefully depleting those same things for the Germans. The French military began drafting plans for their faux Paris, or sham Paris, but before anything could be constructed, they needed to decide where the decoy should be built. It obviously had to be close to the real Paris, and in a location that looked similar but far enough away that the Germans wouldn't inadvertently hit the real city. The perfect location was found about 15 miles outside the center of Paris in the commuter town of Maisons-Laffitte. This was great news for the French military, as the location almost perfectly mimicked the landscape where the real capital was built. It sat right on a similar-looking stretch of the River Seine and provided enough land to construct the necessary decoy structures. Unfortunately, there were people living in the town of Maisons-Laffitte that needed to be relocated and their homes destroyed. But there was no sacrifice too great to ensure the Germans did not destroy Paris. The residents were moved and the construction of the faux Paris began. At this point, you're probably thinking there's no way the Germans would be tricked by a fake city built of wood and cloth. That's the crazy part, since the airplanes had just recently been invented and there was no such thing as radar. The only means of locating a target was by sight. The Germans were flying Gotha bombers, which were open-top wooden biplanes covered in fabric. The planes were so simple that the whole bombing system consisted of men sitting in the back of the aircraft and hand-dropping bombs over their target. There were no fancy instruments used for sighting, so they did everything using only their eyes as guidance. It was not complicated, it was not safe, and it was most certainly not precise. Since the planes had no GPS or radar, there was no way for the crew to tell their exact location. If the French could build their fake Paris near the real one and have it look similar from the air, it was definitely in the realm of possibility that they could trick the Germans. So that is just what they did. The project itself was put into the hands of an Italian-born engineer named Fernand Jacopozzi. He led a team that was tasked with building the most realistic replica possible using only widely available materials such as wood and cloth, along with some lighting to really sell the faux city. Jacopozzi was an electrician by trade, which made him perfect for the project. The main indicators that German aircrafts used to locate their targets were lights. By creating structures that looked similar to landmarks in Paris, along with lighting the streets, buildings, and factories in the right way, it would be almost impossible for the German bombers to tell the difference between the fake Paris and the real one. The fake city was split up into 3 main zones. Zone A was built to look like the residential area of Saint-Denis and Aubervilliers. It also included multiple fake train stations, one of which was a replica of the Gare du Nord in all its magnificence. Obviously, the decoy wasn't as intricate, but from the sky, minute details would not have been visible anyway. The engineers were able to construct a building with the same architectural features and size, just made of wood and recycled material. Zone B was a replica of the heart of Paris and included fake landmarks like Champ de Mars and the Champs-Élysées. These structures needed to be even more precise, as they were well-known landmarks. If they didn't look right, it could tip off the German bombers that something was amiss. Zone B also included replicas of the Trocadero Palace and the Chemin de Fer des Petites Ceintures as well. However, one of the most impressive structures built in the zone was the massive Arc de Triomphe replica, which acted as a central focal point of the faux Paris. This was a labor-intensive section of the fake city, as there were several large buildings that needed to be built as precisely as possible. It also would be one of the main sections of the city that the Germans would use to locate their targets. If the French engineers could sell Zone B of their decoy Paris, everything else would fall into place. Zone C might have been the most essential area of of the decoy. Paris, as it was meant to represent at the industrial center of the city. Huge, completely empty wooden factories were constructed along with train yards, rails, and even locomotives to help make Zone C come to life. It was assumed the Germans would target this area first to try to disrupt French production of weapons and vehicles. If it all went according to plan, the Germans would drop most of their payload on Zone C of the faux Paris, which required relatively few resources to build and wouldn't be as difficult to reconstruct as some of the other areas. If the Germans could be tricked into destroying Zone C, it would be a great victory for France. The enemy would use a ton of resources, destroying nothing of importance. With each zone came unique challenges, but practically all were overcome to ensure that the city of fake Paris was an enticing target for the German bombers. Although the decoy city didn't have every detail of the real Paris, there were some key selling points. Most had to do with the way it was lit, but there were other ingenious methods used to make fake Paris seem like the real thing. On top of using wood and cloth to mimic the architecture of the real city, Fernand Jacopozzi and his engineers used translucent fabrics to create the illusion of light shining through dirty windows and glass roofs of the fake factories and warehouses. The lights on vehicles themselves were bolted in place, but would blink different colors, which made it seem like there was movement and human activity in the area. A final major undertaking associated with the construction of the decoy city was making sure the roads were painstakingly laid out to be as close as possible to real Paris. No one would be fooled from the air if the city wasn't connected by its iconic main boulevards, or it was obvious that the roads were in the wrong place. Since the Germans were using their sight as a targeting system, they'd have quickly discovered something was wrong if the streets of the city didn't match up with their maps. In order to trick the Germans into focusing on the decoy at night, a curfew was imposed, and all lights in real Paris were shut off before sunset. This ensured that only the lights that could be seen from the sky were those of the fake city. It would have been very obvious the French were trying to trick the Germans if there were suddenly two sets of city lights where there should have only been one. With Paris being plunged into total darkness, the only lights illuminating the region were the ones Jacopozzi meticulously placed around Decoy City. Interestingly, Paris was not the only fake city built to try and trick enemy forces. Britain was plagued by bombing runs in the First and Second World Wars. To try to deceive enemy bombers, the British built entire villages that they would use as decoys. Sometimes they would even burn down their own fake towns to confuse German bombers. They would then rebuild the villages and use them over and over again. The United States also had a similar tactic to the French, but with a slight twist. Instead of building structures that they hoped would be bombed, the US built entire towns on top of a Lockheed factory in Burbank and a Boeing factory in Seattle. This was done to hide these facilities from enemy bombers and to trick them into not bombing the factories. The United States was never invaded, so the disguised facilities were never put to the test. And like the fake towns in the US, the fake Paris also never saw any action. Before the decoy Paris was 100% complete, German bombing runs in France ceased in September of 1918. 2 months later, the armistice of the 11th of November 1918 was signed in Compiègne, France, ending the First World War. Once the treaty was signed, the faux Paris was dismantled and the materials were used to rebuild the damage that has been done across the country by enemy forces. Very little documentation was released about the fake city. In fact, it wasn't until relatively recently that researchers discovered the extent to which Fernand Jacopozzi and his team of engineers went in order to fool the German bombers. Now, for another way the Allied army fooled the Germans, watch the inflatable tanks that fooled Hitler.